time again, I got something a little different for you. In fact, when I say a little different, I mean very different. In fact, it's the new book. Are you ready for it? He says, teasing it. There we go. Don't worry about this bar, it's just a print-proof copy. It's the Schofield truck tank. Look at that, I nearly said tank truck. Truck tank. It's the famous wheel-cum-track vehicle from New Zealand. Let's put that over here for a second. The book, that's the print proof. Just finishing going through that, making sure the formatting is correct, and that should be available for sale from Amazon within a week or so, on amazon.co and .co.uk, and then onto other channels thereafter. Fingers crossed it should be there in time for Christmas. So if you're looking for a present for any tank enthusiast who thinks they have every tank book they ever think they need, or think they know everything already, there's that book, because they definitely don't know what is all in that book. So first of all, let's clear something up. It's not a tank. It's not a truck either. It's a truck tank. It's a bit of both. In fact, during the project, the best use of it was to identify it as a type of mobile, self-propelled, all-terrain anti-tank gun. Okay, so the rest of the title, if that's what a truck tank is, the wheel-cum-track. It's an old term for anyone who doesn't know, a vehicle that can operate on both wheels and tracks. This is the fundamental principle behind several such attempts over the years to combine the best of both worlds, specifically meeting the needs of a vehicle off-road, particularly on soft ground, and the speed and ease of movement on a road using wheels. It's the way in which Schofield goes about this work which is truly unique. Ernest Schofield was born in 1887. He enlisted for World War I in 1916 as a sapper. He became a lance corporal and was transferred to the New Zealand Engineer Reinforcements, the NZER. He shipped out to Britain in 1918. By the end of 1918, he was working at the Munitions Inventions Directorate at their experimental proving grounds and was promoted to Lance Sergeant in 1919. Unfortunately for him, ill health meant a transfer to the Education Department as an instructor, and he was eventually transferred back to New Zealand in the summer of 1919. He continued to suffer health problems and was no longer fit for war service in August 1919 and was discharged. In 1925, he opened a firm called Schofield & Co. Limited, acting as an office for vehicle sales, primarily for Chevrolets. He did rather well for himself, and through the 1920s and 30s garnered a reputation for himself as a bit of a sportsman keen on shooting and fast boats. He would eventually pass away in 1958. What we're concerned with, however, is his tank work. So let's have a look at that. The initial idea for this vehicle might have been fermenting in Schofield's mind for some time beforehand, given his obvious technical abilities and the work at the MID in World War I. In May 1940, however, around the same time as the disaster for the British Expeditionary Force in Dunkirk, he came up with a novel idea. This idea was effectively a hinged vehicle in two halves. Each half was dominated by a pair of diamond-shaped frames with a wheel at the external ends. With two diamond-shaped frames on each side, the inner frames could be moved up and down relative to the frame of the vehicle, thus alternating between pushing down the outside points of the diamonds with the wheels on, or alternately the inner ends with the track bogies. The wooden mock-up. Using his extensive knowledge of Chevrolet trucks, Schofield sought and was granted permission by the authorities to develop a mock-up, which is exactly what he did. The purpose of the mock-up was to show in real terms the basic elements of his concept. This mock-up was relatively crude and unfinished, but it kept the same basic elements built around the frame of a Chevrolet truck. At the front end, the wheels were on the inside of the tracks and could be steered just like the front wheels on a normal truck. At the back, however, the wheels were on the outside of the drive hubs for the tracks, so the engine only had to drive a single drive shaft to propel the vehicle, whether it was on wheels or tracks. This vehicle, with its partially completed wooden body, was inspected by the Army in August 1940 at the General Motors Works at Pito, and it was approved for further development into a vehicle made in mild steel. Retaining the same basic layout, the vehicle, now built in mild steel, would mount a simple turret right at the back, fitted with a machine gun. It would carry another machine gun in the front alongside the driver, and in general had a rather science fiction appearance to the whole affair. The biggest hurdle, however, to redesign would be obtaining a new rear axle, one of the wheel-cum-track type. This meant Schofield would eventually have to go back to America in person to try and get one. Combine this parts issue with a general lack of the technical expertise needed in tank design domestically, and the redesign process dragged on far too long, all through 1941 in fact. It would not be until September-October 1942 that the design for this new pilot vehicle, using Schofield's wheel-track change principle, would actually be completed. By the time that this redesign had been finished, in fact, it had been not only simplified, but it was quite dramatically different in layout. Gone was the single Vickers machine gun in that weird little turret at the back, and in its place would be a 2-pounder gun and coaxial 7.92mm Besa machine gun in a bigger open-top turret right in the middle of the vehicle. Gone too were the giant diamond-shaped frames, and in their place a simpler arrangement of 2 girders connected to the adjuster screw took its place on both sides. On the ends of those girders, acting as arms, would be wheels, and by forcing down the bolt on the screw, the inner end of the bars would go down, bringing up the wheels on the outside ends and forcing down the suspension bogies in the middle. It's around this time that Schofield seems to have got so excited by his design work, he even suggested to the Army the design of a vehicle based around a standard Army 4x4 truck, which would carry a 25-pounder gun in a central superstructure, and almost like a transformer, could work as its own limber and mount. Whatever merits that idea had, it was not taken up by the Army. He would have to reconcile himself with this pilot vehicle. For the pilot, it was finally ready for trials in November 1942, and it was well received. Like all vehicles on trial, there were a few things to rectify. So the brakes, for example, when operating on the wheels, only acted on the front, and were definitely wholly inadequate, especially in some of the terrain they were driving in New Zealand, down a steep hill. Those brakes overheated pretty easily. That could easily have been fixed. There was no radio. A number 19 radio set was desired. Indeed, the plans were modified in order to try and fit one in, although one was never fitted. There was also a debate over a machine gun in the second hull position in the front, and indeed whether or not there would be a second hull crew position right in the front to act as this radio operator. There was also the definite need to add an anti-aircraft machine gun to the top of the turret. Again, remember, it is open-topped. That would have provided its second machine gun at least. So why was it open-topped? Well, recall, this is not a tank. This is a truck tank. So part truck, part tank. The armour was very thin anyway, little more than bulletproof. This was more of a means to move the 2-pounder anti-tank gun to wherever it might be needed on or off-road. Although Schofield's idea would later strike interest in some areas as a potential vehicle for both airborne troops or an ambulance or some kind of munitions vehicle, that never happened. The basic concept was that it could drive very quickly to roughly where it needed to be on its wheels, on road, change over to tracks, move off-road, fix a point, and thereupon start knocking out enemy vehicles. Bear in mind, it's also extremely light, just under 6 tons, in fact, and the 2-pounder gun, remember, was more than adequate to deal with light tanks of the era, and, well, definitely anything the Japanese might have decided to land on an island raid. Impressed with the vehicle, between November 1942 and April 1943, extensive trials were carried out in New Zealand. They covered 1,000 miles or so 1,500 kilometres, both on and off-road. By 1943, it was good enough that they were trying to elicit interest from the British, showing what they could produce. The New Zealand War Cabinet authorised the transfer of this vehicle to the United Kingdom for testing. The vehicle was transferred, however, in a rather unofficial means. It was consigned as food, packed with food parcels, so upon arrival in the UK, these food parcels had to be unpacked from the vehicle before it could undergo testing. No doubt HMRC enjoyed that. It also appears to have been shipped without its gun. Photos of it on test in the UK clearly show the British-made 2-pounder gun, rather than the photos of it in New Zealand showing it using the Australian-made 2-pounder gun. Presumably the gun was removed because these things were in short supply in New Zealand and there was just no need to ship that back to the UK. It has to be said in any discussion about Schofield's work that this wasn't the only thing Schofield tried in relation to tanks either. He also worked on an anti-tank obstacle concerned with ideas of a Japanese or maybe even a German raid on the islands or an invasion. What was needed was good anti-tank obstacles. These were difficult to make, they were expensive, so his solution would use scrap tyres and concrete. And it was very good. It would have the appearance of a sort of tiered wedding cake of progressively smaller tyres stacked on top of each other and filled with concrete with a hollow metal pipe down the middle. A wooden pole could be put into the pipe so these obstacles could be rolled around to be moved easily, and then once in place could just be erected like a giant annoying traffic cone. They were really resilient. They were good. In many ways they were better than existing designs resistant to gunfire. By the time they were done, though, there was just no need for them. The project unfortunately fizzled out and the Schofield tank obstacles were forgotten about. The last real note is that it's just really sad that the pilot vehicle didn't survive. What Schofield came up with was a unique solution to a very complex problem, and one which even to this day is a matter for extensive debate over whether vehicles should be wheeled or tracks. And regardless of which option you go for, it cannot be said that Schofield's solution was anything other than ingenious, in both how it was done and how simple and effective it was. Had he got the time and resources to develop his idea more thoroughly, it could well have seen some limited manufacture or trials on maybe other large vehicles such as trucks. There were, after all, some experiments, especially in the UK, on adding some tracks to trucks. Schofield's solution might have built within that. Sadly, it didn't, and today the vehicle is all but forgotten as anything more than an unusual curiosity. Hopefully, after this video, and maybe more so after reading my book on Schofield, this thing, remember, then hopefully Schofield and this vehicle will get the credit that it really, truly, honestly deserves. And the men who did this excellent work will get the credit that's long overdue to them. Thank you very much. If you like this video, or anything that's gone on, any of my research, any of these unusual book topics that I come up with on vehicles which would otherwise just be forgotten about as a simple paragraph in some coffee table book on tanks, then please do like, share, subscribe to these videos. This is the only way that we'll have of sharing this knowledge and coming to some new understandings. And if you want to support that, then you can purchase these books. Please do. They're all available on Amazon. There'll be links in the chat below, and this book should be on sale for Christmas this year, or rather both. Maybe you want to try and support me directly through Patreon. That would be great too. Whatever you do, thank you very much for your time and patience, and I will see you next time. Good night.